Yeah. Are we more or less ready here? Okay. Anyway, we are going to try to see if we're going to finish the Perek by the end. By the time we hit Shavuos, I guess we said learn the whole Perek, first Perek. So maybe I won't be elaborate, but a little bit. The whole point is really to understand. So I'm going to see what I can do. I'm just going to finish a Mishneh. We're holding Pirkei Avos Perek Aleph at the end of Mishneh Yud Daled. The Mishnah had said Hillel. We're middle of Hillel over. Hillel has over here 3 Mishnahs, and Hillel is saying, I'll just say the whole Mishnah, but I will explain just the end. I said Negit Shema Abad Shemay. That if somebody is looking, and if somebody is looking for covered, looking for a name, then he's going to lose his name. His name is not. He's not going to be able to sustain it because his whole purpose of finding this name is so that he should look big, and people don't appreciate that, so they don't want that. With the law Moisef, and if somebody doesn't increase, he doesn't increase his Torah learning. He thinks he can stay stagnant in one level. Is Yosef. It's automatic. He's going to lose his. It's going to decrease because at the end of the day, Torah, you have to constantly grow in Torah, or else you become stale. There are stories of even Tanoim in the time of who left their cities for a little while and they stayed alone in someplace else, and they came back and they'd forgotten even some basic halachas. So even with somebody great like that, you have to keep going. Your mind is in a way is a muscle. Like I said once, and the muscle has to be if you don't use a muscle, it atrophies, and you have to keep using it. And if somebody refuses to teach Torah, he deserves death, because if a person doesn't teach, when Hashem created the world, as we said, Bishvil Torah, Nivra Oilim, because of Torah, and he said if you don't learn Torah and accept Torah, then I'll destroy then the world won't exist. So very important that the Torah has a kiyum, so we have to keep teaching it. So it's just because you know it and you don't go to the next generation, it's going to get lost by the next generation. So eventually, chas v'sholom, that the world you could be destroyed. So that's why it's very important for anybody who has Torah knowledge to keep it flowing and going to the next generation. And if somebody who uses Torah as a way to earn a living or to have more covered, he doesn't use it for the sake of Torah itself, is chalap, and the Torah that he learns starts to fade away, like we said, it blows away in the wind. I'm going to say a very interesting story that I saw again many years ago about this fellow. He decided if he got married with his wife, they lived in Switzerland, that he's going to sit and learn for the rest of his life. And sure enough, I'm thinking maybe I've said it once. Sure enough, he had 1 child, 2 children, 3 children, and of course, as he was going along, it got a little bit tougher. So he took on maybe he was learning, but he tutored and made a few dollars on the side. But at the end of the day, it lived very betzumtzum. Everything he had, he earned for the week, he spent, because the family was getting bigger and expenses became larger. And sure enough, his first daughter became a kala, and he didn't have really any money. So his wife said, enough at least to marry you off. You need a substantial amount of money, except for today's days, you just make it in the backyard. But his wife decided maybe he should take a job. So he said, listen, everybody shouldn't took care of me till now, and he's going to take care of me in the future, and I have to rely. We have a from the So what happened was, of course, he got a letter from a judge. And he says his wife saw the letter and she was afraid to give it to him. So it was like a strict, important letter. And he decides to, she says, maybe you should ignore it. He says, I never did anything wrong. Why should I ignore this letter? And he decides to go to the judge. He gets in front of the judge, and the judge is a strict Swiss fella. They have these, tough look about them. And he's a little bit scared. And he says, what's your name? And he says, what is your name? My name is so-and-so. So he says, how do you, first of all, how many children do you have? So he says, I have, I think it was 14 or 17 or something in the teens, children, large amount of children. So he says, so many children, how do you exist? Do you have a great job? And he says, no, I study. I'm a teacher and I study. I just live. So the judge asks him, is there any reason that you would need any money now? So he says, happens to be that I'm making a wedding, and it happens to be it's very tight. He says, well, how are you going to make the wedding? So he tells the judge, I'll tell you the truth, that up to now, my God took care of me, and I'm sure he'll take care of me again. So the judge starts laughing. She looks at him. All of a sudden, he changes his demeanor. He cracks a smile. She looks at the judge, and then the judge says, he says, your God helped you already. He says, what are you talking about? Apparently, it turns out that one of the wealthiest people in Switzerland died.
I'll leave by like 2
minutes. He gave his money to his children.
No, not from here, from Crown Heights.
Sima, you might want to mute yourself.
So I'll leave by 12. Oh, sorry.
No problem.
That's okay. No, it's okay.
Sorry.
It's all right. So he left a tzavah that in his will that the one thing he won't give his family is the largest hotel that he owns in I think in Zurich. He says he's going to give to the person who has the largest family in Zurich. So he says, we will look through the records, and it turns out that you have the largest family. So here are basically the deed and the keys to the hotel, and your God helped you ready to make a wedding. So here, in a way, it's reversed. With Rebbeinu Shalom, a person had such a munus Hashem that the Rebbeinu Shalom was going to give me what I was supposed to get, and he needed some money now. So he didn't want to use the Torah to make a living, and Rebbeinu Shalom repaid him in turn. So we see that it's very important when you learn, and we have to understand also that everything we can do that we're supposed to do in the shtablos, whatever we're supposed to earn. And however, don't go overboard. You have to have a life. And if you see that things are a little schwach now, it's probably going to change because the Rebbeinu Shalom wants it to change. And it's all in the hands of Hashem. And that's for that Mishnah. So let's go to Mishneh Yudalad. Again, Hu Ha Ya'ima. We're talking Hillel over here. He continues what he is saying. And he says like this. Im ein ani li mili. This was a song when I was younger. Im ein ani li mili. Chani la'atzmi mo ani v'mlei achshav emosai. What is he saying over here? If I'm not, the literal translation of this, if I'm not for myself, if I don't take care of myself, who's going to be for me? Chani la'atzmi. But if I am for myself, is mo ani. What am I? So it sounds like a little bit of a puzzle. So first of all, the Kotzker Rebbe, I'll give you a little bit. Kotzker Rebbe was a very, very sharp man. And he was he was controversial because when somebody asked questions many times, he would go at him. People were a little bit afraid of him. And so he makes this statement like this. He says, people repeat it now, but it's actually the source of the Kotzker Rebbe. He says like this: if I am I, because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I exist and you exist. However, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I do not exist and you do not exist. So what is he saying here? He's saying like this: in order for a person to have a meaningful and constructive identity, it has to be something that he gives himself. He can't expect somebody to, if he expects somebody to make his identity, in other words, it's not he that earns the identity for himself, but rather it's a mother that always says, my kid is always the best. And he starts to believe it when he really isn't the best, then he doesn't end up being the best because he has no incentive. If he is who he thinks he is because somebody else keeps calling him that name, then he's never going to reach his potential. He's always going to be in a step below because he thinks he's accomplished what he's supposed to accomplish. And this is what Hillel is saying. Hillel, who came from nothing, he came from poor. Of course, as we said, he was royalty, but he grew up poor. He had absolutely nothing to propel him forward other than the fact that his own will and his own strength pushed him where he was to become in the highest level, to become the president, the Nasi of all of Klal Yisrael of his time. And that's what he's saying. He used to say like this: you think I got here because I got here by somebody else put me here? No, it doesn't work that way. There was this fellow, he was climbing one of the tallest mountains. And he was struggling. It took him 24 hours, 48 hours to get to the top. And he had all the equipment, and he was an unbelievable mountain climber. And he worked so hard. And he gets to the top of the mountain, and he's so excited and so proud of himself. He looks up and he takes a photo shot to himself. And as he turns around, he sees a little boy on the top of the mountain playing with a ball. And he says, what's going on over here? what? I worked now 48 hours to get up here, and you're up here and you're playing ball and everything. Who are you? So he says, I know that you worked very hard, but it happens to be my father did this mountain about 15 years ago, and together with my mother, and I was born here. So for him, he was on the top of the mountain because he was born there, and that's what one of the Rebbes said when he said a lot of times a Rebbe is born into the family, and the son takes over. He says, but if that son takes over just because his father was a Rebbe and he was born into it, or this boy, he's on the top of the mountain, he didn't accomplish anything. He did nothing. He could play ball for the rest of his life. He has absolutely no satisfaction, no accomplishment. On the other hand, even somebody is no matter if he's born into it, especially if he's not born into it, and he fights his way up there, that's an accomplishment, and that's what Hillel is saying. It may not nearly is merely, if I won't take care of myself, who am I going to be? Who's going to make me who I am? Mo'ani. Then you're gonna say Mo'ani. Who? Now I could say, who am I? I'm the guy that worked. I'm the guy that fought to get up there. That's another thing to say. There was a Yaakov Kamenetsky, Alav Shalom. He when his son Shmuel, now he's the Rosh Hashiva, Shmuel Kamenetsky, but when he was a boy, a young boy, he says that right before my bar mitzvah, my father told me he bought me a beautiful, unbelievable present. And I was really looking forward to it. And he told me on the day of my bar mitzvah, I want you to come into my office and I'll give you the present. And sure enough, that he's all excited. He built it up a little bit, his father. And he comes into the office. He says, today, this morning, Baruch Hashem, we put on film for the first time. You told me that you have this wonderful present for me. I'm here. You told me to come into the office. So he says, oh, you're right. He says, go look on top of this shank over there, this closet, and up there you see something with gift wrapped. He says, that's your present. He says, come, go get it and bring it down here. So he goes upstairs, up to the whatever it was, and he brings it down. And he brings it to his father, and his father says, now unwrap it. He unwraps the present, and it was a beautiful present. It was a watch. It was a wristwatch. And he was very excited. So his father, Rabbi Yaakov, says, I know you're excited about the watch, he says, but you don't have no idea, he says, what kind of valuable present I just gave you. He looks at him, but those days for sure, but a wristwatch for a mitzvah was a common present. So he said, I want you to look at the watch carefully. Okay. He looks at the watch and he sees, and he says, what do you see there? He says, it's ways. Do you see there's a second hand there? He says, yeah. You see how fast it moves? Yeah, it's a second hand. He says, I want you to know something, he says. Every time it moves, a second passes, and that second is never coming back. He says, the greatest gift that you have in life, he says, is time. Because you will never, ever get back the time that you lost. He says, so keep that watch and keep looking at it whenever you feel like you didn't accomplish today, and realize that second hand kept moving around and around and around, and every time you finished around one circle, a minute passed and you didn't accomplish what you could accomplish by a minute, which is an unbelievable lesson for a father to give it. And you have to be a Rabbi Yaakov to understand that this is the way you raise a child, by example. The interestingly enough, the Chafetz Chaim says that a person can speak, he says with Lashon, about Lashon Hara, a person can speak 200 words a minute. I made a calculation that he could speak 200 words a minute, and there's the Baal Shem, the Vilna Gaon had a brother, his name was Rav Bram, also a genius. He wrote a sefer about learning Torah. And he says that every time you learn one word of Torah, that word gives you 70 mitzvahs. How does that work out? He says, because there's 70 different ways to learn this Torah, and when you learn Torah even 1 minute, you get in there. It's a spiritual thing as well. There's 70 different mitzvahs involved, 70 different kedushas involved in this one word of Torah. So I figured out, according to the Chafetz Chaim, that in every minute you can speak 200 words. So that's 200 times 70. It's 140,000 mitzvahs you're getting with one word of Torah. I once said this when I was once speaking, and the time was up. Just was the last thing I said. And because there's a mission that we usually finish when we say Pirkei Avos, that Ratzah Kodesh Baruch Hu, the Rebbeinu Shem wanted to give Klal Yisrael more mitzvahs. That's why he gave more schar. That's why he gave us more mitzvahs. But if the Rebbeinu Shem gives you something to do, if you don't do it, then you have an avera. So it's really a 50-50. If you do it, you get a mitzvah. But if you don't do it, you have an avera. So he's not giving you anything more. It's really up to you. They said no. When you do an avera, you get one avera. But when you do a mitzvah of learning Torah, Hibbalem Torah mitzvahs, he says Torah. He doesn't say Torah mitzvah. The Torah, every word is 70 mitzvahs. If every word is 70 mitzvahs, he gave you, every time he gave you more Torah, he increased it 70 times. That your schar. And therefore, it's a big schus to have Torah. So I asked the people when I was speaking, it's up. I said it was 45 minutes an hour. I said, would you like me to say one more minute so you have another 140,000 mitzvahs? But that's the way we have to approach this, because every time we learn something, it's a lot more schar. So that's what he's saying over here. But if you don't, when you let it go, if you let time fly by, you're not going to get it back, and you lost it. So now you have to move for the next second. So you have to know to accomplish whatever you're accomplishing on the next second. Now we're going to say, we're going to go on to the next Mishneh, because as I said, I wanted to see if I can accomplish a little bit quicker. I'll just say one more little opinion on this Imlei Asher side. There was one of the tzaddikim of the early, there was Yerushalayim Shalmal, is a book that was written for the tzaddikim of Yerushalayim at the time of tremendous godless. People lived there very poor, and everybody there, whoever lived there, just sat there and they sat and learned, and they really collected for them all over the world, for these people from Yerushalayim. They were known to be very, very holy people. So one of those people that lived there, we're talking about this roughly the late 1800s to the early 1900s, about a 40-year span. And there was somebody called the Reuben Zelig Bengis. He was a tremendous Yerushalmi that was the big tzaddik. He used to make a siyum shas. We go 7.5 years if we learn one daf a day. Every 5 months he made a siyum shas. Amazing. Siyum shas every 5 months. He really unbelievable. One day he finished siyum shas, and a month later, all of a sudden he tells his wife, could you prepare another Suda? Because they make a Suda when you make a Siyum Shas. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to prepare a Suda. And he says, but I want you to prepare a little bit of a nicer Suda this time. So she says, sure, no problem. So when we get into the Suda, everybody comes. And it was a fancier Suda. So everybody asked him, why? What the first one, he just made a Siyum Shas last month. He says, and why is such a fancy Suda this time? Usually with some cake and some brofen or whatever. So he says, I'll tell you why. He says, this is my 10-minute shas. He says, what do you mean my 10-minute shas? He says, this shas took me so much longer to finish than all the other shasim that I had made up to now. He says, what is it, my 10-minute shas? He says, siyum rather. He says, I go to a lot of briston, a lot of chasanas, and it's called for 8:30 in the morning. He says it's called for 7 o'clock in the morning, or the chuppah is called for sharp 7 o'clock. It's never sharp. He says minimal I have to wait 10 minutes. I do that 10 minutes, he says, and I learn, I always carry my Gemara with me, and I move a little further. He says, I only use that time frame is used for that siyum, that shas. It took me, he said, 20 years. It took me 20 years to finish the shas. So this shas is very chashuv shas for me, because I didn't waste that 10 minutes, and I could have wasted it with a shmooze, with a friend, and everything like that. That is imloi asher. It's a tremendous lesson to learn. So you can accomplish so much, even with just a little bit. Okay, we're going to move to Mishneh Tez Vav. So that is Shammai. Up to now, we were learning about Hillel. And Hillel and Shammai, we said before, throughout Shas, there's Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. In most places, in almost every place in Shas, it happens to be that Beis Hillel, as I said, is the Mekel. He paskins easier, so to speak. So that if it's a question of yes or no, he'll usually say no. And Beis Shammai says usually no. He was the tougher one. Now, the truth of the matter is, if the halacha is like this, then how can you be makel? The question is really, how can somebody be makel? But the Gemara says reverse. No Rav is going to say yes if the answer is no. If you have a shaila and the answer is you cannot do it, there's no Rav that's allowed to paskin yes. However, if a Rav paskins yes, that means it was easy to say no. You could say something. You have my son had a mashgiach years back. Everything he touched was trade, was not good. Don't do it. Throw it out. One day he tells him, I'll tell you the truth. He says, I know how to learn. There's a lot of the things you told me to throw out were okay. He says, it's very easy for you not to worry about my money and I should throw it out. He says, I will show you now in Shulchan Aruch that what you just told me to throw out is 100% okay. So he realized that he was who he was dealing with. And he said, you're right. I apologize. He was wrong. When somebody says, the term in the Gemara says, koycha de hetera adif. Reverse. The koyach of saying mutter or yes is much, much better than the koyach of saying aser. It's easy to say don't do it. It's like I get away. I don't even have to study to say I don't do it. If it's a question of yes or no, I say no. Oh, easy psak. No. You got to make sure to try to make people happier and try to find a hefter. And many times a poor person would come with a chicken. And there was the only chicken. There's so many stories. I don't want to belabor that, but some unbelievable stories where a woman would come to a Rav, and it was once somebody was going to the mikveh. I remember, so it was Erev Shabbos, and she said, I don't have too much time. She said, but look at it because I want you to check this chicken out. And sure enough, he looks at the chicken and he takes a quick look and he says trade, and then walks away. And because of that, there was I would say it already if I started it. There was this child that was born never. He couldn't. He was very, very ill. He couldn't leave his bed. And that's the way he grew up. But his father used to try to. It was like he was also a little backwards. He was because especially he had so many difficulties in those days. There weren't too many. There weren't schools like we have now to bring him into. So most of the time, father was busy, but he would come home and try to teach him to daven, try to teach him this, and he gave him some time. His mother, but he also said they also had other children. And one day, the Baal Shem Tov the Baal Shem Tov tells us, Gabbai, let's go to this farmer. He goes to this farmer, and this is the farmer. Oh, and he walks in, and he says, is there a bris today? So he says, the farmer was like shocked. Oh, the Baal Shem Tov is here. He says, yeah, sure. He said, no, but you don't ask the Baal Shem Tov how he knew. So he says, sure. Oh, I'm so happy you came. Then we're making a bris, we're making a suda, and you're going to be the samdik. It's an unbelievable cover. The samdik was given Baal Shem Tov, a child. The samdik is under kois. He's a tremendous kid. So sure enough, very good. There was also some gedolim with him at this bris from the town, the Rabbanim. They sat down to the suda, and the Baal Shem Tov said, before I go to the suda, I want to shech my own chicken. So he said, I want to check out all your chickens. So he goes into the farm, into the front of the yard. He used to have chickens there, and looking for different chickens. And then finally he says, I don't want any of these chickens. You must have more chickens. He says, well, I have a few more chickens in the front yard. So he goes to the front yard and sees one scrawny little chicken. He says, that's the chicken I want. But Rebbe, I have such a beautiful fat chicken, comfortable. Your bells, these are nice. So they said, no, that's a chicken that I want. So he goes and they shech the chicken. And there was a shaila on the chicken. And he goes and the Rebbe the Baal Shem Tov asks the Rabbanan in the area who sat down. So what do you say about this chicken? So he says they were fighting back and forth. No, it could be like this. It could be like this. And each one of them, and nobody could come up with a hachlata, with a decision. So the Baal Shem Tov says, do you have anybody else in this house? So he says, the looks are, no, not really. So you don't have nobody else in this house? So yeah, we have our son Alexander, and he's in bed, but he's an invalid. So he says, could you go call Alexander? He says, but the Rebbe, Alexander doesn't walk. Could you please go call him? So the Rebbe says, go call him. So he goes into the room, the father, and he says, the Baal Shem Tov says he should come. And unbelievably, this boy gets out of bed, and he starts walking into the room. The father and mother are like going nuts. They're going crazy. They go into the room, and he sits down, and he says, I want you to wash for the Suda. He goes to the thing and he goes washing as if he's a normal kid. Like everybody in town knew this boy is an invalid. And he goes and he washes for the Suda and he sits down. Sits down to eat, and then the Baal Shem Tov says, bring the chicken here. He brings the chicken, he shows it to the boy. And he says, I want you to tell me if the chicken is kosher or not kosher. And the father of the boy is, what's going on here? Doesn't make sense. So he says the boy starts to give from all sides of halacha. One side why it should be kosher, one side why it shouldn't be kosher, and went back and forth, and everybody at the table was like, this boy is speaking as if he's a tremendous God of the Torah. Nobody understood what was going on. And sure enough, he goes and he says the chicken is kosher. And chicken is kosher, and they went and they're eating the chicken. The Shebal Shem Tov turns to the boy and he says, I want you to bench, and I want today's your bar mitzvah. And father says, wow, you remind me today is his bar mitzvah. I want you to put on film. And he goes and davens, he puts on film, he davens, he says, now I want you to go back to bed. He goes back to bed and himself and he lays down. A few minutes later, the mother was so excited, he goes into the room and she sees the boy passed away. And she starts to shriek. And the father goes running in there and says, like, what's going on here? They come out and say, Rabbi, what is going on here? 5 minutes ago, we were so happy. And now, unfortunately, he's not here anymore. He says, I mean, even as an invalid, it's our child. We loved him. So the Baal Shem Tov says, have a seat, let me tell you what went on. He says, there used to be somebody called the Tavur Shar, a tremendous Pesach, who lived 100 years before. This Tavur Shar had this story that I told you earlier. He was on his way to the mikvah. And because he didn't give time, this woman was actually an almana who asked him the sharma. And he quickly looked at it and he passled it. He said it was not kosher, this chicken. And sure enough, the chicken actually was kosher. And the almana had aglis nefesh, and the Rebbeinu Shalom watches over almanas. And he says, this man, this Tavur Shar, as a genius as he was, as a posik as he was, as a rav as he was, and a wonderful mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim, but this he needs a ticket. He has to get paid for that. And sure enough, there was Magalgal, his Mishamos, they told us, everybody, you want to come down? He said, I don't want to come down and live again, because how do I know how I'm going to be? Maybe I'm not going to be as good as I was before. So they made a pishara that you're gonna come down, but you're going to end up being an invalid. So you can't do an avera. An invalid can't do an avera. So you're going to be, your neshama is going to stay the same holiness, but you're going to still have to do this tikkun. And this was the tikkun. He got up, he paskin that it was kosher, and after that, his tikkun was said, and he went back. So you should know that the neshama that you had was a neshama tahira, and you'd be proud that when Hashem felt that you can raise him. It's a very, very deep story here. Shammai, so let's go. So Shammai was the tough one. The Shammai, Hillel said first, if we notice, he said first, you take care. First he starts, Hevet Tamida Shalaharan, Oyev Shalom, Beroidev Shalom. He starts with a Midah Toiva. He starts with Derech Eretz. But Shammai says, I say Torah, and that brings you to Torah. Shammai is reverse. He says, I say Torah Keva. You make the Torah your kviyas. He had a reverse situation. Through Torah, Amor Ma'at V'asei Harbe. He's a little more tough. Don't talk so much. Accomplish. That was his shitta. That was the way he behaved, and that's the way he lived. But he didn't. Right after you got your Torah and you behaved, he says you should be makabel everybody in a save upon the yafas, nice way. And so he's doing like this. Usually we don't pass him like Shammai because derech eretz kadmol Torah. The derech eretz you have to learn and be. Before we receive Torah now in Shavuos, which this week we're going to be done davening Sivan, which is the third month. It's a very, very holy month because we're makabel the Torah. So this is the way we had the 6 weeks that we're learning now. The Pirkei Avos is so that their Eretz should be called military. And I'll stop right here, and we'll have a good Shabbos, and we'll continue next week. Take care, and everybody should have a